Welcome back everyone once again for another tier list. And if you're wondering why another tier list, well, that's because there have been new additions to the game in the forms of DLC and the conclusion of the Year 3 pass here with North Carolina at Season 12. And since then, my last tier maker was actually at the end of Year 2 pass, which was Season 8. So there's a lot of new additions we're going to add to these lists and some things that have changed as well. So as a quick disclaimer here before we start, this is my personal tier list based upon 4,200 plus hours of gameplay and testing and just overall referencing the game and playing it in a personal way, and also for creating content on YouTube. I've been playing SnowRunner pretty much exclusively for my gaming experience since 2020. During that time, I've specifically dedicated my efforts into understanding the performance of trucks created by the SnowRunner developers, as well as other areas of interest. So, as mentioned in prior tier list videos, this is my personal tier list. Based upon my reviews and my current working knowledge of these trucks, I really have spent the majority of my time trying to understand how they operate, the performance of them, and just trying to understand these trucks just for my gameplay since 2021. So keep in mind, I'm going to have my favorites. I'm going to have my bias. Everyone does, but I'm going to try to be as fair as I can. And lastly, each class is going to be kind of ranked differently, because I believe that each class should have a specific role or roles attached to them. And within those roles that are associated with each class, I believe I will rank each truck accordingly. So when ranking the highway and heavy duty trucks, factors that I will mainly judge them on are based upon a couple things, and these are not in any type of order, but they're going to be power, balance, weight, efficiency, versatility, because I believe heavy duty trucks should be versatile, performance, and the ability to have all-wheel drive and diff lock, because some of these trucks here, they might not have all of them, or they might only have one of these features. However, the key factor is how impactful these trucks have been to my gameplay currently and also in the past. And this is all noted in my truck reviews and also my streams. So guys, with that being said, let's start over here and we'll fill out the D category first and build our way up. Just a quick spoiler here. None of these trucks break into the A tier, because the trucks that I actually put, I think the heavy duty and highway trucks are almost just a little bit of a step down from the off-road trucks in their capability. So I don't feel that any of these trucks are worthy of being an A tier. They might be in your mind, but for me, yeah, I just believe the off-road class is just so much farther ahead than these ones in performance and just their capability. So I felt that some of these trucks make it to like a high B, and I think that's actually a pretty good spot for them. That's actually really respectable. To be quite honest, I think C class, in my personal opinion, are vehicles that I tend to use quite a bit, B and C lately. I kind of do stay away from the higher tiers just for, personal challenge. But anyways, let's get started here. Let's fill out this D category. So first off, I'm going to put the Transtar in D, and I'm also going to put the Ford CLT in D, and then we'll take a look at these. I'm going to be switching back and forth to the game, grabbing my controller. So yeah, if you hear those things, I apologize. Anyways, Ford CLT. The Ford CLT 9000, it weighs in at 9,000 tons. US 9,000 tons. I converted this to US tons. If you're wondering why it's a little bit heavier now, it's just because there were some weights that I was missing previously, and also a friend of the channel, Vlad Vulcan, thank you for this, Vlad. He actually told me that I should be adding the wheel weights into the current total weight of the vehicle, because yeah, you can't drive a vehicle around with no wheels. I usually just took the raw weights from the individual truck files, and that was what I derived my weights from. However, yeah, new year, new me, we're going to shift over and do this. So this truck weighs 9,000 US tons. This engine here comes in at 155,000 torque. I actually do like using the high range gearbox on this truck because, however, it's not really super fast and high, so it doesn't really get away from me. Even with like a somewhat slow steering, I'm actually able to keep it on its wheels and keep it on the road pretty well. So I kind of like the high range on this one, but most of the time, if you want to go fast, high range is always going to be your pick. It gets the race suspension, gets 43-inch tires, and high snorkels, and you can see it has a ton of add-ons here, but just keep in mind, just because a vehicle has a ton of add-ons doesn't necessarily mean versatility. I believe versatility and add-on capability are two separate things. Versatility would be add-on capability and actually the ability to fulfill the role of that current add-on that you have equipped. Having add-ons is cool and all, but honestly, I don't really feel like this truck is a good logger or a lot of these things that, like for a fuel tank going off-road in some areas. There's just not a lot of areas I think this truck can handle, and it's really due to not having all-wheel drive and no diff lock. I think if it did have those things or even had a diff lock, I think the versatility would actually increase. However, just because of not having those two crucial features, all-wheel drive and diff lock, there's no way I could have ranked this thing any higher than a D. However, I do feel that it's really good as a saddle low. As you can see, the placement of the saddle is really nice and probably has one of the most steep downward facing rear ends here with the frame actually cutting off here. This creates a great angle for going over bumps and stuff like that with a saddle, so it's not pulling up your front axles, your steering axle essentially. Because we'll talk about that later here, some other trucks. But Ford CLT, I do like it. It's just very hard to use. So I think it being in the D category is probably where it's going to stay for the duration, unless something really drastically changes. Now, talking about its counterpart here, the International Transtar 4070 Alpha. 4070 Alpha comes in at 7.8 US tons, and its engine strength comes in at 160, so 5,000 more than the CLT. It has a raised suspension that somehow is in Season 6. I do not understand why they decided to give it a raised suspension after the base game and then 6 seasons later. I really feel this should have been a level unlock, almost like some trucks like the new Western Stars or the Anniversary DLC trucks that have a level cap to unlock certain features. I feel like this should have been one of them, because the race suspension doesn't really break the game if you get it in Black River as a level up requirement, or anywhere in Michigan. It's not really going to break the game in any type of performance against other trucks. I just feel it would be a quality of life improvement for this at a very early level for newer players, but I divulge. Anyways, it gets 42-inch tires with the race suspension, 1 inch less than the Ford CLT. It has a pretty decent fuel capacity, and both of these trucks, the Ford CLT 9000 and the International Transtar, they have really good fuel consumption. It's actually excellent. It's probably just because they don't have an all-wheel drive penalty, because they just don't have all-wheel drive. So yeah, if you're using a high range, you only have a 30% with all-wheel drive, and then there's the base consumption that's a lot lower than the normal off-road gearbox. So you could use a high range there and go pretty fast and just slam it. And also it has a lot of add-ons, just like the Ford CLT, down-sloping rear end, good saddle placement. This is essentially what I would set up to use both of these trucks for, is hauling weight on their back axles, because basically your weight's pretty much, you want the force going right down onto your only drive axles, right? And I believe the Ford CLT is a little bit farther weighted in the back. I don't remember offhand where the weight is actually placed more or less in this one here. Their collision models are not great. You can see like most of the American trucks are actually plagued with not really good collision models. Some of them are decent, but however, you're gonna notice that they all have these really big fuel tanks, right? Or these big toolboxes, and there's actually collision models on those. Some of them are not as deep that go actually into the animation here. Some are, however, yeah, that's just how they are. That's something they're just plagued with. But anyways, it has good saddle placement. This is probably what I would do, is 5-slot trailer, put weight down on it and hit the gas, throw it in high gear with the high range gearbox, and hope for the best, and just basically force power to its wheels. But anyways, I think trying to make these trucks useful is a very fun thing, especially on the new maps in year 3, because they're just not as brutal as the year 1 maps. So yeah, I just feel like they sit in the D category, and that's kind of where they're gonna stay. Okay, let's move on to the C category. First off, truck I want to put up here is the Western Star 57X. So the 57X actually, to my knowledge, it actually has 9.4 US tons. This is a lot more than I had it before. It's just because I must have been missing some weight in there. So I'm glad I've noticed that here before doing this tier list. So 9.4 US tons. It has a super powerful engine. This engine right here, excuse me, is 220,000 torque. It shares this with the Western Star 49X, both 47Xs, and I think that's it. Maybe the 49. Yeah, that's it. Those ones there. So very strong engine for a highway truck, which kind of is one of the reasons I put it up here in the C, is because of that. You probably could use a high range gearbox. I'm probably sure that's probably going to be the move. Gets a race suspension, only 42-inch tires. They are 100 kilograms a piece, not counting the rears. We're not going to get into the whole rear mass scale thing today. All-wheel drive is switchable, so you can disengage this on lighter roads and stuff like that to get yourself some fuel savings. It's relatively good on fuel consumption when all-wheel drive is off. However, under load, this engine can actually chew through some fuel, but you have a pretty decent amount of fuel. Actually, I think this is second most, actually third most, I think, fuel out of all these. I believe the Western Star 4964 has 80 gallons, and I believe, yeah, you're gonna see the Kenworth up here that just kind of crushes everyone. So something I would definitely use this for is low saddle, or just putting weight on its back axles. The truck is relatively light. It's not super heavy. It has a ton of power to move heavy things like long logs, which is the single, I think this for cargo load, it's one of the heaviest cargos in the game. Has a crane, but it doesn't have a crane and saddle low, which is kind of disappointing, but I understand just how it is. Down sloping rear end here on the frame for that better angles, so you don't have your front end come up when you're going cresting hills and stuff like that with the trailer. So yeah, it's just a very fun truck to drive. I know a couple guys who really love these highway trucks without all-wheel drive, and this one here as well, and they've done some really good things with them. And I really do think with some patience, you can actually have some really good fun with this. All right, so let's move on here to, let's see, what's the next truck I should use in here. Let's put the Fleetstar up in here. Let's talk about the Fleetstar. Fleetstar actually holds a special place in my heart. I feel like I did the Fleetstar pretty dirty when I first started playing the game. I was the guy who jumped ahead and got a Russian truck, brought it back to Michigan, crushed the game up until Season 2 with Russian trucks pretty much exclusively, and didn't learn many things about the game other than just pressing the gas. And it took me losing my game file, starting the game over, and that's when I started doing truck reviews. And this was my first ever truck review that I actually put on YouTube, was the Fleetstar. And I'm really glad I gave it another shot, because it actually teaches you how to play the game. Because the Fleetstar, as we know, isn't necessarily the most balanced vehicle in the game. It actually comes in at 8.1 US tons. Its max engine, I believe, is found in, I believe it's Alaska on Mountain River, but it gets this 2100 Tango engine, I think, in Black River. So this truck relatively gets most of its upgrades in Black River, aside from gearboxes. So it becomes very capable right off the bat. And I think a lot of folks get kind of frustrated with how it performs. But really, if I look back to my randomizer playthrough, when I didn't have all-wheel drive with this thing and I'm just on highway tires, adding weight to its axles with differential locking, this truck was able to pretty much crush Black River in that playthrough, and I had a lot of fun in that way, and it just kind of gave me a new respect for this vehicle. However, it has 45-inch tires, not too large. UOD tires are actually a really good set. However, another thing I would maybe switch over to, because I talked about his balance being very wobbly and bouncy, would be probably using the JAT OMDs, which give you a wider footprint, so therefore probably a little bit more lateral stability. That's probably a good option for you to use to like a sidestep. Usually that's something I would use with American trucks, or even a truck that doesn't feel like it has good balance to it. Wider tires, more stability. So this could be a good candidate for that. Anyways, it gets all of its upgrades pretty much in Black River. All-wheel drive and diff lock it has, and has a lot of add-ons to use. However, there's one add-on that escapes me that I will just not use. And even on I look back to 2021 when I first reviewed this thing, and I did not have any footage of low saddle hauling. Even though it has a down sloping rear end back here, you can see how far this frame sticks out. So yeah, you're gonna have a lot of saddle collision with the trailer behind you. And when you're cresting hills, that tends to pick up your front axles and you cannot steer for the duration of the time that you're going over that hill. So that's kind of why I do not use it as such. I do like using it, just to haul regular things and whatever I can use it with. It's actually a very strong truck, but it's definitely not going to be as strong as some of the ones that we're going to talk about. But yeah, I do think the Fleetstar is a good truck here. And that's probably something you're going to hear me say as well, is because I do believe a lot of these trucks are good trucks. It's just this tier list is hard for me to rank, because I think as I play the game a lot, I do really like a lot of these vehicles as I drive them more and more. All right, so let's move on here. Let's talk about the GMC MH9500. I think GMC MH9500 sits at the top of the class, to be honest. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Fix my controller here. GMC MH9500 comes in at 8.8 US tons. Its max engine maxes out at the 2100 Tango engine here. This is 145,000 torque. A lot of people think this Westline V6 is the top engine. However, this engine actually is 5,000 torque less than this one. It has better durability, less fuel consumption. So in my opinion, I would probably use this unless you are prone to taking damage. Yeah, I think with the fuel capacity only being 64 gallons, I'm probably going to use something that's a little bit more efficient, a little bit more powerful, because I love doing what this truck is set up to do. I'm a low saddle type of guy, so I try to use most trucks that way, and that's kind of how I like to use it. And the reason I do like using it in low saddle is because its balance is not too great. It kind of is tippy, similar to the Fleetstar, especially if you have the race suspension. So the reason I have the race suspension on here is because I create angles with my truck and trailer to basically keep myself balanced. It's just kind of like something I do. I talked about it on my trailer review. If you want to know about that, you can check that out as well. Jet OMD tires as well to give me a bigger footprint for more lateral stability. And then we have to talk about its all-wheel drive switchable diff lock. The kind of sad thing is it does get a diff lock in Michigan. This is the first truck that you actually find that's in the hauling class if you don't skip the tutorial. So most of us came across this truck. It literally was, bare bones. It finally gets a diff lock, but that's just not enough to compete with the Fleetstar or even the White Western Star in Michigan. It's just not, unless you skip ahead to Kola Peninsula and get its all-wheel drive upgrade. And then this truck becomes quite powerful in my opinion, I think. So has a ton of add-ons, pretty much like a lot of these trucks here in both of these classes. Do I think it can fulfill them pretty well? I think so. I do think you're going to probably have some balance issues if you aren't comfortable with a lot of those things. I think especially with big add-ons like the medium log crane or the medium log frame and carrying long logs or medium logs like this, you're going to feel it. So those are some things you should watch out for it. But however, I do like low saddle hauling with this as well. Pretty good saddle placement, not a lot of overhang in the back. And yeah, I do like the GMC. I've actually started to like it a little bit more in recent times. So I felt it should probably sit at the top of the C class. Okay, so let's move on here to, let's go Cat CT680. So this is a truck that actually I debated on actually moving up to B, but I'm actually going to leave it here. I think it's still a strong C, and we'll talk a little bit about this. CT680. So the CT680 clocks in at 9.1 US tons. That's kind of like approximate because I'm rounding up to the nearest 10th. So CT681 has a engine called the GB8V 2700T engine. This has 192,000 torque. I believe this engine is found in Alaska. Has an off-road gearbox, high-range gearbox, pretty much the same gearbox options, no race suspension, 47-inch tires. It can have the jats as well. I don't know if it would need them. I think it's actually a pretty balanced truck. And we'll talk about its suspension properties here in a second. Switchable all-wheel drive diff lock. Its fuel capacity is actually pretty decent. I think its hauling capacity is actually pretty good as well. Something I would note here is you can see that whenever I throw a heavy add-on on, the suspension in the rear almost doesn't flex at all. And I will show you guys what I mean by this is it actually has something called a walking beam suspension in my opinion. I think it's actually still there. Yeah, I would actually probably have to flip the truck over to see it, but you can see the beam running through. And this is the same thing with the CT680 is the truck doesn't necessarily flex really well with the suspension when it goes over things. I think this is kind of where it hurts it balance wise, even though it is relatively stable. I think its weight is set really low, and so is the 681. But you can see its frame almost slopes downward from fore to aft. And I don't like that, especially when hauling a trailer. I kind of want to sit a little bit higher back here just to give it more clearance, because trailers have hit boxes as well. They get caught up on things. So having a higher point here is essentially better for off-roading. Down-sloping rear end, this is nice. It still does the job with low saddle pretty well. It also handles a lot of these add-ons pretty well, to be quite honest. However, I think the main issue I have is really with this thing is basically how low it sits, because you have these big fuel tanks and then on each side and stuff like that, and this little box over here that they do have hit boxes, and that's kind of where you can get caught up here with this truck. That's just kind of like what plagues the US trucks in general. But anyways, with the suspension, a lot of vehicles that like the HX520, they have a pretty decent suspension in the back, and something I believe that happens here, even though the truck is balanced, is it can't absorb a lot of shock that the terrain is hitting it with. So your suspension is supposed to kind of dampen the shock that's hitting your truck from going over bumps and all those things in the game, and not necessarily jar you off balance. But in this case, it's so rigid that you feel those effects a little bit more. But anyways, I feel this truck should be a strong C. I do still use it. I'm actually using it on season 12 right now, and it's doing wonderful. So yeah, I do like this truck a lot too. All right, next truck we're going to talk about is the Chevrolet Kodiak C70. I think the Chevrolet sits right behind the Fleetstar, because the Fleetstar essentially is, I think it's the king of Black River. I think the only reason I didn't put it above these is just because it's tippy nature and not being able to use low saddle as I would love to use it. That's kind of like my thing. I'm not really a hitch trailer type of guy, for some reasons I won't get into. But yeah, I think the Kodiak slides in here, and I do like the Kodiak a lot, and we'll talk about that. So the Kodiak, to me, I almost feel like the Kodiak should be somewhere or something like the Ford F750. I almost feel like this truck they should kind of make it unique in the way, because single axle and stuff like that, because I don't really believe this truck is meant for carrying very heavy add-ons, because that single axle in the back, and you can kind of see once you throw some super heavy upgrades, or the fuel tank, it sits pretty low, and you can see the tires, they don't really like this when you set off and go down paths. And I've used this truck as a support vehicle like this. I think it's better suited for lighter things. You can use it as scout support, even hauling two slot cargo. I think it handles it pretty well. However, so the Kodiak, let's talk about its baseline here. 145k torque with a 2100T engine, 53 gallons capacity, not a lot of fuel, 200 liters I believe that equates to. Not a lot of fuel at all. It comes in at 9,000 tons, has a pretty good ground clearance. I think its collision model is okay-ish. 43-inch tires, this is the same as the Ford CLT. Gets the race suspension, I believe, in Island Lake, Michigan. However, it does not get it has a diff lock already on it. It does not get all-wheel drive until Alaska. So it becomes this truck where you can't really use it much if you don't want to have that challenge. And it's kind of logically like, why would you use this truck over the Fleetstar when the Fleetstar has, all-wheel drive already, and then you have to wait till Alaska to just get this. So it kind of takes a while for this thing to upgrade to actually be formidable. But I do think this truck is really nice. I think it's relatively stable. It's not necessarily a tippy truck. I think, yeah, you can always tip a truck over, period. And I think something that US trucks kind of hurt them in a little bit is when they add heavy add-ons, because some of them have weight in their cabs, and maybe the ratio of that seems a little bit higher than most of the Russian trucks that I've come to find. So what happens is when you have weight in your cab, weight in your frame, basically your center of gravity is basically averaged out at a set point, right? And then you add any type of these heavy add-ons here, let's say the short logs, or even probably one of the heaviest add-ons is the fuel tank, right? So this probably has some type of center of gravity here. So we all know you add something super heavy, and this is actually 12 metric tons. So it's much heavier than the actual vehicle. So then your center of gravity balance is going to be, shifted upward. That's just how things work. And the problem is a lot of these vehicles, they can't really handle that as well as some others. And they feel the effects of things like even having a small crane attached to them. They can feel the sway back and forth that is a little bit more pronounced than the Russian vehicles. But I think also the small crane of the US crane is a little bit heavier than the Russian crane. So that could also be an effect as well. But anyways, I think this is a pretty good truck, and I think it sits in the right place where it needs to be. Okay. All right, guys. So we've completed the C tier. We're going to talk about the last tier here is B. And first, we're going to talk about the GMC Brigadier. I think this is definitely a B in my opinion. I don't use this truck a lot because I don't know. Sometimes I just glance over it because I'll use something that's, I don't know, a little bit weaker. Sometimes I'll use these down here a little bit more, or I try to, or I'm always using, something like the CT681 or like the HX, Western Star and such like that. But, in recent times, I've actually been using this a little bit more, and I actually really do like it a lot. And I kind of wish they would bring out more vehicles like this, to be quite honest. Okay, so GMC Brigadier 8000 is 8.8 US tons. Its engine is exclusive to itself, I believe. It is 170,000 torque. Tuned custom suspension gets it some pretty good ground clearance. Its fuel capacity is relatively high for basically its class or classes here. Both these classes, 46-inch tires, are pretty standard. Some of these have 47. That's 1 inch taller, but I think its ground clearance is actually pretty respectable. All-wheel drive diff lock, pretty decent sized snorkel, and it has a ton of add-ons, pretty much like all of these here. Yeah, I like to use low saddle. It's my thing. Its frame doesn't come out too far. It handles it pretty well. Essentially, there's not really much to say about the GMC Brigadier. To be honest, if I were to just give one sentence about the GMC Brigadier compared to the GMC MH9500, I just think it's a high-powered, more balanced version of the GMC MH9500, and that's really in simplicity how I feel about the Brigadier. I think it's much more consistent. I think it's much more balanced, and yeah, even if you're having trouble with this balance, throw the Jat tires on it and use it. I think it's a really good truck. Something I do feel though is it can start to chug some fuel, but that's kind of not really a foreign thing to a lot of vehicles in the game, to be honest. But I feel like some of these American trucks, whenever they're under load, they can definitely start chewing some gas. So this one, it can get there, but it does have a decent sized fuel tank to be able to withstand that. So yeah, 170,000 torque here, which is a much more than the GMC MH9500. So I think it's definitely have a lot more towing power and potential. So yeah, I thought it was a strong B. All right, let's move on. We're just gonna get this out of the way. I'm gonna put the Kenworth up in B. This is a brand new addition to, I think this came out right around season 11 or after season 11, right before season 12 came out. And it came out as a vehicle that did not have had a switchable diff lock, and it also did not have all-wheel drive. So it came out in a better state than the Western Star Wolfpack DLC did when it first arrived. And I drove this thing, I gave it a review, and then I learned that it was going to have some updates to it. And because originally this truck was actually a heavy class truck. Since then, they moved it on season 12. They moved it to a highway truck. And the reason it sits in a B, and you're probably thinking to yourself, it only has diff lock. Why in the world is it sitting in the B class? Well, I'm going to tell you here. I really do think the Kenworth W990 is a rival to the P512 PF. And here's why. It has the Prime C13 engine. This has the most torque in this whole class, or both of these classes here. And a lot of trucks actually in the off-road class too as well. 228,000 torque vehicle. It does wonderful with the high range gearbox now, and I think it did even before. Race suspension gets it to 52-inch tires, which is the highest which is bigger tires than a lot of the trucks even in the next class we're going to do, which is going to be the off-road class. And yeah, custom Kenworth tires. These are the tires you want to use now. Before, it probably would have been some of these doubles down here. But anyways, this is what you should use. The truck itself weighs 10.6 tons, so it's actually the heaviest truck in its class at 10.6. Has the highest torque. It got the buffs it received were its tire codes were essentially buffed to P512PF levels. Its center of gravity balance was shifted slightly in favor of being more stable. And then it was shifted to the highway class. And then lastly, what you do recognize is it doesn't have a switchable diff lock. It now has an always on diff lock. So I don't know. I think having the always on diff lock, I'm seeing a little bit better performance like outside those super muddy areas when you would have to like downshift to engage all-wheel drive. So this kind of basically means you can just run high range on this thing and just crank it, and it will run. So yeah, because it has the most power in the class, the biggest tires in the class. It is the only truck in both of these classes to have always on diff lock, special tire codes, and also a ton of add-ons. It's wonderful. I think another thing that really, I think this truck absolutely should do is hauling low saddle. You can see the down sloping rear end, great saddle placement. Having that much power throughput through these tires here is a absolutely wonderful thing. With these tire codes, you'll get some really great performance with that. Another thing I do want to mention here is you can see 101 gallons. And I believe this equates to like 380 liters of fuel. This is kind of unheard of in the highway and heavy duty class. And it's kind of, I don't even know if there's any trucks in the off-road class that actually have this much fuel. Also, it has a roof rack to even supply this even further, and also some repair points as well, making this truck even that much more reliable with range and being able to repair itself on the way. However, the downsides of this truck really, its collision model is actually pretty good. Even for its tanks, this is something I've been looking at. However, this drop axle is something that just is not really friendly. I do not expect anyone to use this, nor do I recommend anyone use the drop axle, because this one is actually really rigid. So whenever you deploy it, if you just drive up to like a bump, it'll actually pick up your back wheels. And you got to understand, it doesn't have all-wheel drive, so your front axles can't necessarily help you pull forward over that. And this will actually just bump up your rear wheels, and this is your main driving force. So it doesn't have any flex. There's no give. There is some, but not much. So it'll actually lift up your vehicle. I literally did this on stream yesterday. I drove over a curb, bumped this up, and literally the tires were just spinning. So, and also on my review, you can see this as well. So you guys can check that out. There's 2 videos. If you go to my review and the update video, I'll tell you everything that is updated on this truck. But anyways, I think this definitely is a strong B. And I think it'll sit around here because, you know, the P512PF in the heavy class, I think I rank it around a B. This is arguably the same or better than the P512PF in my opinion, as like an overall. It's just, it kind of has become a really strong vehicle. So yeah, that's where I think I'm going to sit it. All right, let's just get this out of the way. I think the White Western Star is a B+, and I think a lot of folks might agree, a lot of folks might disagree. That's okay. But the White Western Star is really strong. I think, in my opinion, the White Western Star is essentially the standard of what a heavy duty class truck should be. You know, coming from the Fleetstar in Michigan and then getting this fully upgraded, it's kind of like, I say the same thing. It's a breath of fresh air, because the Fleetstar, you're kind of battling it with its balance nonstop, especially like in the areas of like Smithville Dam, where there's a lot of up and downs, you know, left and rights, easy places to tip over. And yeah, it shares the same engine here at 155K torque. Comes in at 10,000 tons, so it's actually a rather heavy vehicle. Gets the race suspension, gets pretty much all upgrades in Michigan, except for its last engine here, which is, I believe, in Mountain River, Alaska. 47-inch tires. Yeah, tons of add-ons. And this is something I believe this truck has true versatility. I believe it can do everything pretty much within the scope of these add-ons pretty well. Something I really like to use it with is, like I always say, low saddle. Its placement is extremely far back, downward sloping rear end here on the frame. And yeah, it's just a wonderful truck to use, to be honest. The stability of it is, you can just see it's super wide, even wider with the jets if you want to even go farther to an extreme. Other than that, its collision model underneath is actually very nice. All things considered, it's just honestly just a wonderful truck. There's really not any real downside to this vehicle. It kind of stays relevant even in later seasons as well. It's just kind of crazy how this truck is that good. The crazy thing is, it's not one of those vehicles that'll blow your socks off with power. It's just not one of those vehicles. I think it's an overall balanced vehicle. It's kind of like I consider the white Western Star the Tega of or maybe not the Tega, but I would say it's kind of like the standard of what a heavy duty truck should be, because it's just so good at what it does. And it's not necessarily the most powerful, but it just does everything really well. Good all-arounder, I would say. So yeah, I believe it stays where it's at. Okay, so let's move on here. I'm gonna throw the HX520 up right behind the white Western Star. I really thought about actually moving this ahead, but I think because the Western Star has a special place in my heart, I think its collision model is actually better, and I think its ground clearance is better as well. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave the Western Star where it's at as a very strong B. I also think the International HX is actually a strong B as well. So let's go International HX 520. I've been using this a lot. I just pulled long logs with it over on season 12. You can see, yeah, I've been changing all my colors on my trucks, so they're all in this like military tan look. So yeah, anyways, International HX 520 is at 9.4 US tons. So it's the second heaviest truck essentially in its class. The Kenworth W990 is actually the heaviest truck on this whole video here. So anyways, it's a pretty decent balanced truck. I believe its balance is pretty good. The only thing is its collision model, and when I say collision model, I mean ground clearance is not as good as I would like it to see it, but that's the thing. It has these low sitting boxes and fuel tanks. That's just kind of, I've said it before, this is what kind of you have to deal with. Anyways, it has a really strong engine at 192,000 torque for its size. I think that's a pretty darn good engine, to be honest. It's shared with, I want to say 11 vehicles in the game. I think it's actually more than the KZ GT engine. I think the KZ GT engine shares like 9 vehicles share that one. That's at like 260,000 torque. So this one, a lot of vehicles can use this 192,000 torque engine. So this is one of them. It doesn't really get a high sitting snorkel. It gets these little fuel or these air filters here. So you're not gonna be able to go through like crazy deep water, but usually there's not a ton of areas like that in the game that you really have to worry about. But there are some. So you get the 47-inch tires, and all-wheel drive diff lock is switchable. Fuel capacity is pretty decent. You know, its powered weight sitting at S+. I do believe that this truck is like a jack of all trades and a master of none. To be honest, I do feel like it is very similar to the Western Star, or the white Western Star, but just with more power, a little less ground clearance. That's kind of essentially what I would equate it to. I love pulling low saddle with it. I think it does really well. Did really well with pulling logs with minimal effort. Really heavy loads, it just doesn't back down. Yeah, the only thing I just think its ground clearance is the only issue I really have. Other than that, its balance properties are really good, and I think it's just an overall vehicle that you can pretty much say it's actually versatile. It can use all of those add-ons pretty well, and I think this truck has kind of turned my head a little bit. When the anniversary DLC first came out, I was super skeptical, and then I started using this more. I was like, wow, this is actually a really good truck. Like, maybe I should use the Cat CT681. And that's kind of where I'm going to go back, and we'll talk about the Cat CT681 now. This is the last one here, and the Cat CT681 is legitimately my favorite vehicle here. I think it's the top of its class I think these are all strong Bs, to be honest. I think like I could probably rank these all like either a B or B plus. And I think these probably you could interchange a little bit if you wanted to, but I do believe the CT681 does hold a place up here at the top. And this is probably just my bias, but I'll kind of explain what I mean by I think its place is pretty secure. So upon first arrival of the anniversary DLC, I did not think anything was good about this truck, especially when people look at it, they see the dead axle there and they just say, ooh, I'm not using it. However, the CT681 actually has a decent collision model. All things considered, it does have the collision model where its fuel tank is and the box is here. You got to understand that's just how it is. It does have the walking beam suspension that's similar to the 680. So you will have that. So it does have that suspension that really doesn't flex too much. It comes in actually at 9.3 US tons. The CT680 is 9.1 US tons. So it's a little bit heavier than its brother. Pretty much almost sits on the same frame, just a different truck, different engine. And we're going to talk about that right now. So this vehicle also gets the 2700 Tango engine as an option. Pretty much all these little GB engines it gets if you really want to like maximize fuel capacity, but I don't think it's really needed because this 2900 TTA comes in at 210,000 torque. And the great thing about this engine also is not only does it only have 210,000 torque, which is some of the highest power in the class aside from, well, the Kenworth. It's crazy because it actually has good fuel consumption with it, and you can see the ultimate power and fuel efficiency is actually in the description of this engine. And usually what we see is when you look at a engine with more power, you're always kind of trading something for that power, right? With upgrades, there's usually some type of trade-off. With a raised suspension, especially for like the American trucks, you're trading balance for ground clearance. And in this case, in a lot of cases, you're trading efficiency for more power. And in this case, you're really not trading anything. You're actually gaining efficiency and you're gaining power. So this is something that I really, really like about this vehicle is, its fuel consumption is great. Its power is great. It holds its add-ons very well. Its balance is relatively set low in its frame. So it's a very stable vehicle. I believe it's very versatile in what it can do. Its collision model is pretty good aside from the fuel tanks, the collision mesh and its fuel tanks and such like that. But that's just pretty much how the standard is when it comes to vehicles in this game. I know like trucks like the Kodiak, it doesn't have like a low sitting fuel tank. So there's not really much there to catch on in the middle of the truck, which is kind of good. But this one, it has it. But anyways, I think this is my top truck B+ rating in the highway and heavy duty class. So I hope you guys have enjoyed my tier list here. This is my tier list basically. Some things have changed, some things haven't. I believe this is where I think after 4,200 hours, I would place these vehicles. Some definitely have moved around, but even the trucks that are in the C tier, this doesn't mean they're bad. This actually means that I still use these a lot. And I do actually genuinely love most of these trucks here. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Please give me a like, subscribe, and until next time on the off-road class tier list, God bless and stay upright.